8 years of silence. 8 years of a new name, a new city, a new life built from flour and fire and sheer stubborn will. Amara Okoye thought she had buried the past deep enough that it would never crawl back to the surface. She was wrong. The morning Kong Tai Sung walked through the glass door of her soul bakery. The world she had spent nearly a decade constructing began to crack, not because of the men behind him, not because of the gun she knew was holstered beneath his jacket, but because of what happened when his eyes moved past her face and landed on the two 8-year-old children sitting at the corner table doing their homework. He went completely still, and Amara's blood turned to ice. If you've never had to watch the most dangerous man you've ever loved, realize the truth you've been hiding from him for 8 years. Like and drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. The bakery smelled like cardamom and burnt sugar that morning, the way it always did on Tuesdays when Amara ran her second batch of chin-chin too long in the oven because she got distracted checking invoices. The radio on the shelf above the espresso machine was playing something low and scratchy, old American R&B that she'd downloaded before the streaming subscription lapsed, and the light coming through the front windows had that particular quality soul light got in October. Pale and slanted and thin as paper, it was, by every available measure, an ordinary morning. Amara stood behind the display counter wiping down the glass with a cloth that smelled faintly of vinegar, her locks pinned up under a wide fabric wrap the color of rust, a dusting of powdered sugar across the left side of her apron like a smear of chalk. She was 34 years old. She had calluses on both palms from the dough hook of a mixer that needed replacing. She had a small burn scar on her right forearm from a baking sheet that had slipped 2 winters ago. She had 2 children who were currently sitting at the corner table doing their Tuesday morning homework before school. 8 years old, both of them, a boy and a girl who fought like small cats but slept curled against each other like they were still in the womb. She had a life, a real one. Small and imperfect and held together with early mornings and the income from maybe 30 loyal customers a day, but real. Hers. Built with her own 2 hands in a city that had not known her name 8 years ago and had slowly, incrementally, learned to trust it. The bell above the door rang. Amara didn't look up from the glass. "We don't open for another 20 minutes, she said in Korean, her accent still slightly rounded at the edges in ways that 8 years hadn't fully smoothed. "If you want to wait outside, there's a bench." Nobody answered. She looked up. There were 3 of them inside the doorway, which meant they hadn't come in through the sound of the bell. They had come in through the bell, and she simply hadn't registered the way the room changed when they entered it. That was the thing about men who operated at a certain level of danger. They had a gravitational quality. The air around them organized itself differently. 2 of them she didn't know. Large men in dark coats, faces blank and watchful, positioned on either side of the door in the way that said, "We are not customers, we are architecture." Human walls. She had seen that kind before. She had spent enough years adjacent to that world to know what a bodyguard looked like when he was doing his job. The third man stood between them, slightly forward, and he was looking directly at her. Amar's hand stopped moving on the glass. Kong Tae-sung had not changed as much as she needed him to have changed. That was her first thought. Not he found me, not how, not even the hot animal fear that came an instant later like a wave behind the first. Her first thought was that 8 years should have done more damage to him than this. He should have gone gray, gone heavy, gone somewhere softer or somewhere harder in ways that made him unrecognizable. Instead, he was 41 years old, and he looked like a man who had been carved rather than grown, the line of his jaw still clean, the set of his shoulders still the same controlled stillness she remembered, like a language her body had learned and never forgotten. He wore a dark charcoal suit. No tie. The top button of his shirt undone in a way that was not casual, but simply indifferent to the effort of formality. His hair was shorter than she remembered. His eyes were the same, that particular dark that was almost black and caught light without giving anything back. He was looking at her the way she had seen him look at problems he intended to solve. "Amara," he said. Just that. Her name. In his voice, which was low and even and had the particular quality of a man who had never needed to raise it to make a room go quiet. She put the cloth down on the counter. She did not reach under the counter for the phone. She did not call for her employee, Sujin, who was in the back kitchen doing prep. She did not look at her children, because she understood with absolute cellular clarity that looking at her children was the worst thing she could do in this precise moment. "We're not open yet," she said. "I know." He took a step into the room. His bodyguards did not move. "I'm not here for bread." "Then what are you here for?" "I need a caterer for an event at the estate." He said it simply, the way you'd say something true that was also not the real thing you were saying. "Someone recommended your business." Amara studied his face for any sign that this was what it appeared to be. An ordinary business inquiry. A coincidence. A man who had found her by accident and had not yet recognized her as anything more than a face from a former life. She was good at reading Taesung. She had spent years learning to read him the way you learn to read weather. Not because it was easy, but because your survival depended on getting it right. He knew exactly who she was. He had known the moment he walked through the door. The question she could not answer yet was how long he had known before he walked through the door. "I don't do estate events," she said. "I'm a small shop. I do wholesale orders for 3 local restaurants and birthday cakes by order. That's the scope of what I offer. I'm prepared to pay significantly above your standard rate. I'm not interested in your money." Something moved in his eyes. Not emotion exactly. Taesung had always kept emotion so far below the surface that what showed up instead were these small disruptions, like something large moving deep underwater. "You haven't heard the offer yet." "I don't need to." He was quiet for a moment. That particular silence she remembered. Not empty, but loaded, like a room where all the furniture has been moved to the walls to make space for something that hasn't arrived yet. Then he looked past her. She felt it before she could stop it. Her eyes tracked his gaze the way you track a car, heading towards someone you love, that involuntary lurch. And she looked too, and she saw exactly what he was seeing. Kofi was frowning at his math worksheet, his pencil working in tight, frustrated circles at the margin of the paper, the way he always did when something wasn't adding up the way he needed it to. He had her mouth, the full, stubborn set of it, but his face was shaped by something else entirely. The high cheekbones and the strong line of the brow, and the way his eyes, when he looked up at a problem, tended to go very still and very focused, like a shutter closing. Seo-yun was reading, which she preferred to homework in the mornings, a picture book she'd already read 4 times balanced against her knee, her locks, shorter than Amara's, still learning what they wanted to be, falling against her cheek. She had her mother's hands and her father's eyes, and an expression of such complete absorption that she hadn't registered the men in the room at all. Taesung looked at them for 4 seconds. Amara counted. Then he looked back at her. His face had not changed in any way she could have described to another person, but something behind it had shifted, and she felt the shift the way you feel a temperature drop. Not dramatic, not sudden, but absolute. A before and an after, separated by the space of 4 seconds. "Interesting," he said, very quietly. "They yours?" "Yes." "How old?" "That's not your business." "How old, Amara?" She held his gaze. She did not answer. Taesung turned back to his bodyguards and said something in Korean too low for her to fully catch. She got car and weight and the edge of something else. And the 2 men left without a word. The bell rang as the door closed behind them. Now it was just him and her, and the R&B playing low on the shelf, and the 2 children in the corner who had not yet looked up. "I'll take a coffee," Taesung said, and pulled out a chair at the table closest to the counter and sat down. And his posture was perfectly composed, and his eyes were watching her with the patience of a man who understood that some things could not be rushed and had decided that this was one of them. Amara stood behind the counter for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked to the espresso machine and pulled a shot, because the alternative was telling him to get out, and the part of her brain that had survived the years adjacent to his world knew with cold precision that telling Kang Tae-sung to get out of a room was a sentence she could say but could not enforce, and she needed to think. She needed to think. She set the coffee in front of him without a saucer. He didn't acknowledge it. "It was a good life you built," he said. His eyes moved around the bakery. The pale yellow walls, the hand-lettered menu board, the framed photographs of pastries interspersed with photographs of Lagos and Accra and one of Seoul from the bridge at night. Simple. Real. "I like it." "I can see that." She watched him. He watched her. The coffee sat between them untouched. "Mommy," Kofi's voice from the corner, still half absorbed in the worksheet. What's 9 times 8? 72, she said, without looking away from Taesung. Oh. A pause, the sound of pencil on paper. Why does it feel like it should be more than that? Because you want the big answer, she said. But 72 is the answer. Write it down. Taesung was looking at the corner table. There was a quality to his stillness that she recognized and feared. Not anger, not the controlled fury she'd seen from him in the years when she'd been close enough to witness it, but something quieter and therefore more dangerous. The stillness of a man doing arithmetic of his own. What are their names? He said. That's not something I'm going to tell you. Amara. No. He turned back to her. They have my face. They have their faces. The boy especially. He said it with a steadiness that was almost clinical, almost like he was reporting an observation rather than detonating one, and she understood then with complete certainty that he had already done the math, that he had known before she confirmed it by flinching. Same face I had at that age. My mother still has photographs. I look at that boy, and I am looking at 25 years ago. She had prepared for this moment. She had prepared for it in the abstract, had imagined it late at night in the years after the twins were born, had run the conversation through her head in all its versions, had rehearsed what she would say, what she would refuse to say, the line she would hold. In her imagination, she had been calm, prepared, armored. What she actually felt standing behind the counter of her bakery at 7:43 in the morning with powdered sugar on her apron and the low R&B playing and her children doing their homework 6 feet away was a terror so specific and so physical that it took everything she had to keep it off her face. I think you should leave, she said. I don't think that's what either of us actually wants. What you want isn't relevant to what I'm telling you. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket. She went still, that old reflexive stillness, and produced a card and set it on the counter. Plain white. A phone number. Nothing else. I'll be in touch about the catering contract, he said, and stood and buttoned the single button of his jacket with the unhurried precision of a man who had never done an undeliberate thing in his life. Think about it. He left. The bell rang. The door swung shut. The R&B kept playing. Kofi erased something on his worksheet with the focused violence of a child who has changed his mind. Seo Yan turned a page. Amara stood behind the counter and pressed both palms flat against the cool glass and breathed. She had been 26 years old the first time she'd walked into Kang Taesung's orbit, and she hadn't known what she was walking into. Not fully, not in the way that would have made her turn around. She'd been in Seoul on a fellowship, studying traditional grain fermentation techniques for a thesis that would eventually become the foundation of her bakery's entire sourdough program. She had been brilliant and underfunded and deeply lonely in the specific way you are lonely when you're in a foreign city, and the loneliness is half homesickness and half the growing suspicion that you are not the person you were supposed to become. She had met him at a gallery opening she attended because her fellowship advisor knew the artist and had given her a +1 ticket she almost didn't use. Taesung had been there for reasons she only understood later. The gallery's primary investor had ties to 3 of the organization's shell corporations, which she did not know at the time and which would not have meant anything to her if she had. She knew that he was looking at a painting she was also looking at, and that he had made a comment about it that was both perceptive and dismissive in equal measure, and she had disagreed with him, and the disagreement had lasted 40 minutes and ended with him asking if she wanted to get dinner. She should have said no. She understood that now in the way you understand the place on the stairs where you missed a step, not as a judgment, just as a fact about the architecture. She had said yes. The relationship had built the way serious relationships sometimes did, not gradually but in jumps, each stage arriving before she felt ready for it. 3 weeks, and she had known she was in love with him. 6 weeks, and she had moved into the apartment adjacent to his own, which was how she had understood something was different about him, that he chose proximity without full dissolution of distance, that the apartment and not his rooms was the offer he was making. 3 months and she had understood what his organization was, had made the decision to stay anyway in the complicated, rationalizing way you make decisions when love and fear are both telling you different things and you're not sure which one to trust. She had stayed because she had told herself she was separate from it, a woman with a life of her own, a fellowship, and a thesis, and an identity that existed outside his world. She had stayed because she had believed, had genuinely, foolishly believed, that she could love Kang Tae-sung and still maintain the borders that kept her safe from what he was. She had stayed for 2 years. She had left when she found out she was pregnant. The memory of that last morning still lived in her body the way bad memories did. Not in the mind, but in the muscles. In the particular tightening of the chest that happened when you recalled something that had cost you more than you had expected to pay. She had taken the test in the bathroom of the adjacent apartment, sitting on the cold tile floor with her back against the wall, and she had understood in the 30 seconds she sat there with the test in both hands exactly what she was going to do. Not because she didn't love him. That was the part she had never been able to explain to herself in any satisfying way. She had loved him, completely and without adequate self-preservation. She had loved the versions of him that most people never saw, the man who remembered small things, who listened to her talk about fermentation processes with genuine attention, who stood in the kitchen of her tiny apartment at 2 a.m. eating toast because he couldn't sleep and didn't want to wake anyone with his insomnia. She had loved him, but she had also been present for the year in which 3 attempts were made on his life. She had been in the building, 2 floors away, the night arrival's men came with enough firepower to make the news in 3 different cities. She had spent 6 weeks sleeping with a bodyguard stationed outside her door, had learned to check under her car before she got in it, had watched Tae-sung sit across from her at dinner with a gunshot wound that he was managing through controlled breathing and sheer refusal to acknowledge the reality of it. A baby changed the arithmetic. A baby changed everything about the arithmetic. She had left on a Tuesday morning with a bag that looked like a weekend trip and $8,000 she had saved from her fellowship stipend and the research grant renewals. And she had not looked back in the way that meant she had not allowed herself to look back, which was the only kind of leaving she knew how to do. She had told herself he would understand. She had told herself that a man like Tae-sung, who knew better than anyone what his world cost, would understand why she had run. Had made herself believe it through the months in London, through the pregnancy, through the first years in Seoul when she was building the bakery and learning to sleep through the night again. Through all of it. Standing behind the counter after he left, she understood for the first time with real clarity that she had been wrong. Soojin came out of the kitchen at 8:15 with a tray of almond croissants and found Amara exactly where she'd been standing for 30 minutes, both palms on the glass counter, staring at the front door. "Unnie." Soojin set the tray down. She was 22 and sharp-eyed and had been working at the bakery for 2 years and had learned to read Amara's moods with the efficient calibration of someone whose paycheck depended on the emotional climate of the room. "You look like someone died." "Nobody died." "What happened?" "Nothing happened. I'm thinking." Soojin looked at the card on the counter. Then she looked at Amara. She was smart enough not to touch the card and smart enough not to ask further questions, which was one of the reasons Amara had kept her. "Kofi and Seoyeon are going to be late for school," she said instead. Amara straightened up. She breathed. She folded the card into her apron pocket without looking at it and turned to her children at the corner table. "Pack up," she said. "Time to go." "What?" She walked them to school herself that morning, which she didn't always do. Usually Soojin took them on her way in, or they went with Mrs. Park from down the street whose daughter was in Kofi's class. But that morning Amara walked them herself, one hand in each of theirs, through the October streets of the Mapo neighborhood she had chosen because it was ordinary and residential, and the kind of place where a woman with a small bakery and 2 children could be just that and nothing more. They were 8 years old, and they were everything she had. Kofi walked on her left, still turning over the math problem in his head. She could see it on his face, the slight furrowing, the working through. He was the one who needed to understand the mechanism behind the answer, who wasn't satisfied with 72 until he understood why 72, which meant he sometimes arrived at correct conclusions much later than his sister, but retained them longer. He had a particular habit of asking questions that revealed he had been thinking about something for much longer than the question implied. Seoyeon walked on her right, fingers loose in Amara's, already mostly somewhere else. In the story she'd been reading, or in whatever story she was building in her head from the parts of the one she'd finished. She was the reader, the builder, the one who constructed elaborate scenarios and played them out across multiple days with a commitment to internal consistency that Amara found both impressive and slightly unnerving. She would abruptly announce plot points in her ongoing games with the gravity of someone reading from a prepared document. They reached the school gate. The usual crowd of parents and kids and someone's grandmother with an umbrella despite the sky being cloudless. "Good day," Amara said. She kissed Kofi's forehead. She kissed Seoyeon's. "Straight to after-school club, both of you. Don't leave with anyone except me or Sujin Uni. Understand?" "You always say that," Kofi said, "and you always understand, so say it back to me." "No one except you or Sujin Uni." "Good. Go." She watched them until they were through the gate and absorbed into the crowd. Then she stood on the sidewalk outside the school with her hands in her apron pockets. One of them closed around the card, and she made herself breathe through what she needed to breathe through before she went back to open the bakery. The afternoon was busy enough to be almost normal. A table of women from the apartment complex on the corner, who came in for cake and coffee on Tuesdays, 2 catering inquiry calls she handled from behind the counter, a wholesale delivery to put together for the restaurant on Yanghua Road. Sujin worked the front. Amara worked the kitchen. At 2:15, while she was doing prep for the next morning's batches, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize. She let it ring. It rang again at 2:40. At 3:05, it rang a third time, and she picked it up because the alternative, waiting for whatever was coming to arrive on its own schedule, was intolerable. "I want to meet them," said Taesung's voice. No greeting, no preamble. She had expected that. "No," she said. "Amara." I said no. "They are my children." "You don't know that." A pause. "We both know I know that. So does the math." Another beat. "The boy has my grandmother's eyes, exactly. I sat in the car for an hour before I drove away, and I went back through my memory, and I kept returning to my grandmother's eyes." She said nothing. "I'm not going to disappear," he said. "I want you to understand that. Whatever decision you make, whatever position you take, I am not going to disappear now that I know. That is not an option that is available to either of us anymore. You're threatening me. I'm telling you the truth. That's different." She leaned against the prep table. Outside, through the kitchen's small window, she could hear the street. A bus, someone's music, the ordinary noise of a Tuesday afternoon in a neighborhood where nobody knew what she was standing in the middle of. "What do you want from me?" "I want to meet my children, under whatever conditions you decide are acceptable. I will agree to whatever terms you set within reason. And if I say the terms are you never come near them again?" "I would say those terms are not within reason." She breathed. "I need time. I'll give you 3 days." "That's not time. That's a deadline." "Yes," he said. "It is." He ended the call's quote. She closed the bakery at 6, sent Sujin home, picked up the twins from after-school club, made dinner. Rice and a pepper stew she made from a recipe her mother had sent written in her mother's cramped handwriting on a folded piece of paper that was so old now it was starting to soften at the creases. She moved through the routine of the evening the way she moved through the routine of every evening. Homework supervision, baths, the reading time that Seoyeon demanded as a condition of bedtime, the negotiation with Kofi over what constituted an acceptable number of minutes of additional reading before lights out. She moved through all of it and watched her children and kept her face ordinary and her hands steady, and she did not let them see what was underneath. When they were asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold, and she took the card out of her pocket and looked at it for a long time. She had spent 8 years being afraid of this moment, had built an entire life with this moment as the shadow underneath it. Not obsessively, not in ways that had made her brittle or unable to function, but as a baseline awareness that the life she'd built was built on ground that was not entirely solid, that there was something under it that could move. She had told herself it was fear alone that had made her run. Fear for the children she was carrying, fear of the world they would have been born into, fear of what it meant to raise children in the vicinity of men who settled disagreements with organized violence. And that was true. All of that was true. But there was something else she had never quite let herself name, which was that she had also run because she had not known how to ask Taesung to choose between her and the world he ran. Had not known how to make that ask of a man who had built his identity out of what he controlled, what he protected, what he refused to abandon. Had been afraid that if she asked and he chose the wrong answer, it would break something in her that she needed intact to survive. So she had not asked. She had run instead, and she had spent 8 years telling herself it was for the children. Sitting at her kitchen table at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, she understood for the first time that it had also been for herself. That the running had been, in part, a coward solution to a question she had been too afraid to ask. She picked up her phone. She did not call the number on the card. She called her sister in Lagos instead, where it was 4 in the morning because her sister had always been the only person who knew the truth, and the only person she could think of at 11:15 when the ground was moving. Her sister picked up on the fourth ring. Amara. Her voice was thick with sleep and sharp with the immediate alertness of someone who had been waiting for years for a particular call. What happened? He found us. Silence on the line. Then, very quietly, "Are you safe?" "Right now, yes." "The children?" "Asleep. They don't know." Another silence. Her sister breathed. Amara heard the sound of movement. She was getting up, going somewhere quieter, the small sounds of a house at 4 in the morning. "What does he want?" "To meet them." "And what do you want?" Amara looked at the card on the table. Outside, Seoul ran its engines through the night, indifferent. The tea was cold. The kitchen light was too bright. "I don't know anymore," she said. "That's the problem. I used to know exactly what I wanted, and now—" She stopped. "Now he's real again," her sister said. Amara didn't answer because her sister was right, and they both knew it, and some truths didn't require confirmation. What she did not say, what she could not say even to her sister who knew everything, was the thing she had understood the moment Taesung sat down across from her counter with his untouched coffee and his terrible patience, that 8 years had not done what she had needed 8 years to do. That the version of him she'd been afraid of finding across a room had arrived, and he had sat in her bakery with her children nearby, and he had been, in some fundamental way that terrified her more than the organization he ran, and the enemies that came with it, still the man she had loved. She said goodnight to her sister. She washed her cup. She turned off the kitchen light. In the bedroom doorway, she stood for a moment and looked at her children asleep in their room across the hall. The shapes of them under their blankets, the quiet rhythm of their breathing in the dark. She had 3 days. She didn't know yet what she was going to do with them. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, standing in that dark hallway, was that 3 kilometers away, in the back of a parked car on a street she had never walked down, one of Taesung's men was reviewing photographs taken that morning through the bakery's front window. Photographs of Amara behind the counter, photographs of the twins at their table, and that Taesung, in the back of that car, was not looking at the photographs of Amara. He was looking at the photographs of his son and his daughter, and his jaw was set in the way it set when he had already made a decision but had not yet decided how to execute it. And the man sitting next to him, who had worked for the organization for 11 years and had learned to read the gradations of that jaw, knew enough to stay very quiet and very still. "Find everything," Taesung said finally, without looking away from the photographs. "School, routines, anyone they interact with regularly. I want it all." "And the mother?" Taesung looked up from the photographs. Out through the car window at the lights of the city, Seoul moving through the night at its enormous ordinary speed, carrying 8 million people toward their mornings, indifferent to all of their particular catastrophes. "She made a choice 8 years ago," he said. "Now she's going to make another one." He handed the photographs back and looked out the window and said nothing else. And 3 kilometers away, in an apartment above a bakery that smelled of cardamom and old sugar, Amara Okoye lay awake in the dark and listened to the sound of her children breathing and did not yet know that the surveillance had already begun. The morning after Taesung walked into her bakery, Amara woke at 4:15 and lay in the dark and listened to the city for 20 minutes before she accepted that sleep was done with her. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window in the dark with the mug in both hands and watched the street below. The empty sidewalk, the parked cars, the streetlight at the corner throwing its pale cone down onto wet pavement. It had rained while she slept. She hadn't heard it. She looked at the cars. She had not been the kind of person who looked at parked cars before she met Taesung. That was one of the things his world had given her and never taken back, the habit of reading stillness as a possible threat, of understanding that a car with no visible occupant was not necessarily empty. She looked at the gray sedan parked 40 meters down the block, that had not been there when she'd closed the bakery last night. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned away from the window and drank her coffee and started her prep 2 hours earlier than usual, because the alternative was standing at that window, watching that car, until her children woke up, and she could not afford to fall apart before 7 a.m. She called the number on the card at 8:30, after the twins had left for school, and Sujin had arrived and the first batch was out of the oven, and she had done everything she could think of to delay the call. He picked up on the second ring. "The gray sedan on my street," she said, without greeting. "How long?" A brief pause. "Since last night." "Pull it." "Amara, I am not asking. Pull it, or I take my children and I disappear again, and this time I will be more careful." Silence on the line. She could hear him breathing, measured, controlled, the way he breathed when he was deciding something. "It'll be pulled within the hour." "Thank you. I want to meet them this week." "I said I needed time." "You said 3 days. It's been 1. "I said I needed time, and you said 3 days, and those are not the same thing." She kept her voice low and level, even though the back of her throat was tight. "I will call you. Don't call me again before I do." She ended the call before he could answer. She stood over the prep table and pressed both fists into the dough she'd been working and breathed through her nose until her hand steadied. Sujin came into the kitchen with an empty tray and took one look at her and turned directly around and went back out front without saying a word, which was the correct response. The gray sedan was gone by 9:15. She checked from the bakery's front window between customers, casual enough that nobody would have noticed, old enough in her paranoia to know how to make checking look like nothing. It being gone didn't mean nothing was watching. She knew that. But the act of compliance, the fact that he had pulled it when she asked, told her something she filed carefully away. He was managing her. He was being deliberate about the distance between pressure and force. That was Taesung being strategic, which was Taesung being dangerous in the particular intelligent way that was harder to defend against than simple aggression. She had 2 days left before his deadline. She spent the afternoon working the counter and thinking. Oh wait, the call she hadn't expected came at 3:45 while she was packaging a birthday order. It was a woman's voice. Older, Korean, formal in a way that was almost antique, the kind of formality that belonged to a generation that still treated phone calls as ceremonies. "Miss Okoye." Not a question. "My name is Kang Myung-suk. I believe you know my son." Amara set down the pastry box very carefully. "Mrs. Kang." "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "You are," Amara said. "But I'm listening." A pause that might have been approval or might have been assessment. With women like Kang Myung-suk, the two were often indistinguishable. "My son doesn't know I'm calling. I want to be clear about that." "All right. He found you yesterday. He came home last night and he sat in the study for 4 hours and didn't eat dinner, and I've known my son for 41 years, so I know what that looks like. It looks like a man who has had something returned to him that he had given up grieving." Another pause. "I saw photographs. He had them on his desk." Amara's grip tightened on the phone. "What photographs?" "Of you, of the children." The voice was steady, carefully steady. "They have his face, Miss Okoye." "Mrs. Kang, I'm not calling to threaten you. I want you to hear that. I'm calling because I am an old woman and I have watched my son run that organization for 15 years, and I have watched it cost him everything that wasn't the organization itself, one thing at a time, until there was almost nothing left." A breath. "And now there are 2 children with his face, and I find I have things to say that have nothing to do with threat." Amara sat down on the stool behind the counter. The birthday box sat open in front of her, the pastries arranged in their careful rows. "Say them," she said. "He will not let this go. I think you know that. He is not built for letting things go. He never has been, not since he was a child. He holds things." A pause. "But he is also not his father. I want you to know that. Whatever you saw of his world, whatever you understood of what the organization required, he is not his father. He made choices his father would not have made. He drew lines his father did not know existed." The formality shifted slightly, like a window opening. "I'm not asking you to trust him. I'm asking you to consider that the man you ran from 8 years ago has had 8 years as well." Amara looked at the front window, the street, The ordinary afternoon moving past. He had me surveilled, she said. Yes, he would. That's not a defense. No, Mrs. Kang said. It isn't. I'm not defending it. I'm contextualizing it. There's a difference. Another breath. He was afraid you would run again. The word afraid landed with more weight than Amara had expected from that conversation. Tai Sung afraid. She turned it over. How did he find me? I don't know the specifics. I know that he never stopped. A pause that felt careful. Not in the way of obsession, in the way of a man who needed to know you were alive and safe, and eventually learned to live alongside not knowing more than that. Amara closed her eyes. Miss Okoye, the formality was back, complete. I would like to meet my grandchildren before I die. I am 68, and I have earned the right to say that plainly. That's not a small ask. No, it is not. Silence between them. The bakery sounds. The low refrigerator hum, a customer at the front. Sujin's voice handling the transaction. I'll think about it, Amara said. That's all I'm asking. Mrs. Kang ended the call, and Amara sat for a while with the phone in her hand and the birthday box open and the afternoon moving past the window, and she thought about a woman she had met once at a dinner she wasn't supposed to have attended, who had looked at her across a table with sharp, appraising eyes and had said, in very clean English, "You're smarter than the last one. That's either very good or very complicated." She hadn't known at the time which one it had turned out to be. She told Sujin to close up. She picked up the twins at 5 and took them to the park that sat between the school and the bakery, the one with the good climbing structure and the old men who played pas duc at the stone tables near the gate. She sat on a bench and watched Kofi and Seo-yeon work the climbing structure with the focused physical commitment of children who treated play as engineering, and she tried to think clearly. The problem was not whether Taesung had the right to know his children. That question had an answer she had been avoiding for 8 years, and sitting on a park bench watching her son and daughter, she understood that avoiding it any longer was a form of dishonesty. She was running out of justification for. He was their father. That was a fact with weight and consequence, and she did not have the right to unilaterally decide it meant nothing. The problem was what knowing them would cost, because knowing them meant being known by the organization. It meant her children existing, officially, in the ledger of things that Kang Taesung valued, and she understood enough about the arithmetic of his world to know what happened to the things Kang Taesung valued. They became leverage. They became targets. They became the specific vulnerabilities that men with grudges and ambitions spent years cataloging and waiting for the moment to use. She had run to keep them out of that ledger. She did not know how to let them into it without also letting in everything that came with it. Yama. Seo-yeon appeared at her knee, breathing hard from the climb, a scrape of bark on her wrist. Kofi says the top bar is mine, but I got there first. You did? Obviously. Then you own the bar. Seo-yeon considered this, deemed it sufficient, and turned back to the structure. Amara watched her go, the straight-backed run, the absolute confidence, the way she moved through the world as if it had been arranged for her convenience and had simply failed to inform her of certain obstacles. She had Taesung's certainty. That was the thing Amara had always known and never let herself say. The way Seo-yeon occupied a room, the way she made decisions. There was something architectural about her self-assurance that had nothing to do with Amara and everything to do with a man her daughter had never met. Kofi was different, more like Amara in temperament, more prone to working through things before committing, more invested in understanding the mechanism before acting on the result. But even Kofi had something in him that was not Amara, some quality of stillness under pressure, of going quiet rather than anxious when the stakes were high, that she recognized from across 8 years and a deliberate act of forgetting. They deserved to know where they came from. She had known that for years, in the abstract. She had not known how to convert that abstract knowing into a livable decision. She was still sitting with that when her phone rang. Not Taesung's number. A number she didn't recognize at all. No area code she knew, the string of digits with a format she couldn't immediately place. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Miss Okoye. Male voice. Korean. Not old. 30s, maybe. Pleasant in a way that was clearly constructed. The way a customer service voice was pleasant, professionalism applied like a coat of paint. I hope the park is comfortable this evening. The weather's held up nicely. The bottom dropped out of her stomach. She stood up from the bench. Her eyes went immediately to the twins on the climbing structure, to the gate, to the stone tables where the old men played, to the street beyond the fence. Who is this? A concerned party, the voice said. Nothing more dramatic than that. We've been watching your situation develop with interest, and we felt it was time to reach out directly. What do you want? Conversation, at this point. An understanding. You find yourself in an interesting position, Miss Okoye, between Kang Taesung and the choice of whether to re-enter his world. We'd like to offer you a third option. I don't know who you are. No, you don't. A pause. But we know quite a lot about you, and about your children. Their school routine is very consistent, by the way. Admirable for two 8-year-olds. Most children that age resist consistency. She was walking toward the climbing structure before the sentence was finished, phone against her ear, eyes moving across every face in her line of sight. Don't. I'm not threatening, Miss Okoye. I want to be very clear about that. I'm demonstrating capability. There's a difference. Taesung had said almost exactly the same thing to her that morning. I'm not threatening. I'm telling you the truth. That's different. She had thought at the time that it was uniquely his phrasing. It was not uniquely his phrasing. It was the phrasing of a category of man, and the category was suddenly wider than it had been an hour ago. What do you want from me? She reached the climbing structure. She put her hand on Kofi's shoulder. He startled, looked at her face, and his expression shifted into the careful attention he produced when he understood that something was wrong but didn't know what yet. She pulled him close. She looked at Seoyeon 3 feet away and held out her other hand. Seoyeon looked at her hand, looked at her face. She came down from the bar without argument, which meant she also understood. We want you to do nothing, the voice said. We want you to decline Kang Taesung's offer of reconciliation. We want you to take your children and remove yourself from Seoul, as you did before, and resume your previous arrangement of no contact. We're prepared to provide resources to make that transition comfortable. And if I don't, then things become complicated. The pleasantness did not waver. For everyone. She had both her children by the hand now, moving toward the gate. I'm ending this call. Of course, think about it. You have a little time, though not as much as you might prefer. A pause. Oh, and Miss Okoye? Don't tell Taesung about this call. It would only accelerate a situation that everyone benefits from keeping slow. The call ended. She walked out of the park gate with a child on each side and turned toward home and did not run, because running told anyone watching that she was afraid, and she could not afford to appear afraid in the street with her children. But her hands were shaking, both of them. She kept her grip on her children's hands tight enough that Kofi looked up at her and said very quietly, Yama, you're squeezing. Sorry. She loosened her grip. Sorry, baby. Is something wrong? I'm just cold, she said. It was 58 degrees and she was wearing a coat, and it was an inadequate lie, and she could see from Kofi's face that he knew it, and that he chose to accept it anyway, which was the particular grace her 8-year-old son offered her in the moments when he understood that the truth was not something she was ready to share. She held on to his hand the rest of the way home and tried to keep her breathing even, and counted to herself the way she hadn't needed to count since the years when she'd been learning to sleep again. She called Taesung at 9 p.m. Both children were in bed. The apartment was quiet, with the specific quiet of a place where someone has been afraid all day and the fear has finally settled into something more manageable but no less present. He picked up on the first ring. Someone called me, she said. His voice changed in a way she felt rather than heard. A quality shift, a slight tightening. When? This afternoon, in the park. They knew we were there. They knew the children's school routine. She stopped. They told me to take the kids and leave Seoul, said they'd give me resources, said not to tell you. Why are you telling me? Because they told me not to. A beat. And because they knew exactly where we were. Silence. She could hear him thinking. Not literally, but she could feel the quality of his silence shift into the particular mode it occupied when he was assembling information into threat assessments. She had lived adjacent to that silence for 2 years, and she recognized it the way you recognized bad weather. Did they give a name? He said. No. Describe the voice. She did. Male, Korean, 30s, cultivated pleasantness that sat on top of something much colder. Taesung listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a pause of 3 seconds. Park Jin-hyuk's organization, he said. Not a question. I don't know that name. No, you wouldn't. Another pause. He's been trying to reposition for 2 years. He needs leverage that doesn't exist yet. His voice was very controlled, very even. She had learned long ago that evenness in him was not calm. He found leverage. My children are not leverage. In his calculation, they are. Taesung said it flatly, not cruelly. The flatness of a man stating an operational reality, not making a moral assessment. He wants you gone because a reunification between you and me closes a door he's been working toward. If you disappear again, the children disappear. If the children disappear, I have no acknowledged family. If I have no acknowledged family, you have nothing to protect. Exactly. She sat with that. The room was dark, except for the kitchen light. So he wants me to run because my running makes you more vulnerable. Yes. And you want me to stay because I want my children. The evenness cracked, just slightly, just enough to hear what was underneath it. And because I would rather you were inside my protection than outside it, for reasons that are currently practical and also not entirely practical. She didn't answer that immediately. Outside, Seoul ran its engine through the night. She pressed her free hand flat against the kitchen table. I need to know something, she said, and I need you to answer me honestly. Ask. If I bring them into your world, if I allow you access, allow whatever version of family you're proposing, can you actually keep them safe? Not in theory, not as an organizational claim. Honestly, can you? A long silence. I cannot guarantee that nothing will ever threaten them, he said. That is not a guarantee I can make, and you would not believe it if I made it. What I can tell you is that they will be the most protected children in this country. What I can tell you is that every resource I have will be organized around their safety. What I can tell you is that outside my protection, after today, they are already in the picture. A pause. Park Jin-hyuk called you. That means he knows. That means the information already exists in his organization. That means the window in which your anonymity protects them has closed. She understood what he was saying. She had understood it the moment the pleasant voice had told her he knew the park, knew the school routine, knew exactly where she and her children were on a Tuesday afternoon. Running again would not fix it. Running had worked 8 years ago because nobody knew. Nobody knew anymore. I need to talk to them, she said. The children, before anything else, before any meeting, before any arrangement. I need to tell them something. Not everything, not yet, but something. All right? I decide how much. I decide when. All right. And Taesung. She stopped. Started again. If you do anything, if you make any move regarding my children without my knowledge or consent, any surveillance, any contact, anything, I will find a way to disappear that you won't be able to follow. I survived once. I can survive again. Do you understand me? Yes, he said. And then, after a pause, I should tell you, the surveillance last night. It wasn't only to find your routine. What else? Park Jin-hyuk had a man outside your bakery 2 days before I came in. I didn't find out until last night. The timing of my arrival was not accidental. A beat. I knew you were there for 6 weeks. I waited because I was trying to decide. Then his man appeared and I stopped deciding. She absorbed that. 6 weeks. He had known for 6 weeks and had waited, and then someone else's threat had forced his hand, which meant the entire sequence of the last 2 days, the arrival, the coffee, the card, the deadline, had been partially a response to a danger she hadn't known existed. You should have told me that first, she said. Yes. No qualification. I should have. Don't do that again. I won't. She believed him, which frightened her more than she expected, because believing Kang Taesung required a kind of opening up that she had spent 8 years sealing shut. And she could feel it now. The seal giving, the pressure behind it, 8 years of distance compressing back into the present tense with the weight of everything that had accumulated while she wasn't looking. She said goodnight. She sat in the quiet kitchen. In the morning, she was going to have to talk to her children, and she still didn't know what she was going to say. And the city outside kept moving, indifferent, and somewhere in it a man named Park Jin-hyuk had a file with her children's school routine in it, and somewhere else in it Kang Taesung was making calls she would not hear until their consequences arrived. And Amara Okoye sat at her kitchen table and understood that the life she had built, the real, small, imperfect, hers one, had already changed. Not tomorrow. Not when she made the next decision or the one after that. It had changed this morning when a man walked through her door and looked at her children. She just hadn't let herself name it until now. She talked to her children on a Wednesday morning before school, which was not the morning she had planned to do it, or the way she had planned to do it, but the planning had stopped being relevant sometime around 9 p.m. the night before when she understood that the window was already closed. She sat them at the kitchen table with their breakfast in front of them, Kofi's rice and egg, Seoyeon's toast with the specific brand of strawberry jam she would accept, and no other. And she sat across from them, and she did not have a script and did not pretend to have one. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to eat while I tell you because you still have to go to school." Kofi put his spoon down. "Eat," she said. He picked it up again. She had rehearsed versions of this moment for years, in the abstract, in the dark, in the small hours when the twins were asleep, and she had nothing to do but sit with the decision she had made. In every version, she had been calmer than she was now. In every version, she had found better words. "You've asked me about your father," she said. "Both of you, at different times. And I told you he lived far away and that things were complicated. That was true. It was also not the whole truth." Seoyeon had gone very still in the way she went still when she was processing. Not the stillness of shock, but the stillness of a child filing information rapidly, building a new structure from new material. Kofi was looking at his bowl. "His name is Kang Taesung," Amar said. "He's Korean. He lives in Seoul." She paused. "He came to the bakery 2 days ago." Kofi looked up. "The man in the suit." She hadn't known he'd seen. "Yes. I saw him through the window when we were leaving," he said. "He was looking at us." "Yes? Does he know about us?" "He does now." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the neighborhood was starting its morning. A truck somewhere, somebody's door, the particular urban percussion of 8 a.m. in a residential block. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a life she had built to be ordinary. "Is he dangerous?" Seoyeon said. "Not afraid." Assessing. Amara looked at her daughter and felt something in her chest pull tight. "He runs a powerful organization. His world has risks in it. That's part of why I made the choices I made when you were born." She stopped. "I'm not going to lie to you and tell you his world is safe, but I'm also not going to make that decision for you forever without telling you it exists." "Can we meet him?" Kofi said. The directness of it. She had forgotten, had let herself forget, how direct children were when you actually told them the truth. "That's something I'm still working out." "But you're going to let us," Seoyeon said. Also not a question. "I'm considering it." Seoyeon picked up her toast and bit into it with the composure of someone who had just received information that confirmed a theory she had held for some time. "Okay," she said. Kofi was still looking at his bowl. She watched him do what he always did, go quiet, work through it, arrive somewhere. "Is he why you always check the cars?" he said. Amara breathed. "Partly." "And why we never go back to Lagos for more than 2 weeks?" "Partly." He nodded slowly. He picked up his spoon. "Okay," he said, like his sister, the same word, the same register, which meant they had somehow already discussed this between themselves in the way they discussed everything between themselves, in the private language of two people who had shared a womb and had never entirely stopped sharing a frequency. She stared at her children and felt the specific complicated grief of a parent who understands for the first time that their children have been quietly carrying something heavy that the parent put there. "I'm sorry," she said, "for not telling you sooner." "It's okay, Yama," Kofi said, and meant it, which was almost worse. She called Taesung from the bakery at 10 and told him she was ready to arrange a meeting. She kept it brief. He kept it brief. They agreed on Saturday. neutral location, public, her choice of place. He accepted her terms without qualification, which she noted and filed. She did not tell him about the phone call from Park Jin-yook's man. She was still deciding what to do with that. She should have told him immediately. She knew that. He had told her about the surveillance outside her bakery, had offered her the transparency she'd demanded, and she was sitting on material information about an active threat and processing it alone, which was, she could admit this to herself while standing over her mixing bowls, not a decision made from strategy. It was a decision made from the deeply ingrained habit of handling things alone that 8 years of solo parenthood had carved into her operating system. She was still deciding when Taesung called her at 2:15. "I need you to listen," he said before she could speak. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it yet. Not cold, not controlled, compressed, like pressure behind a wall. Carefully. "What happened?" "Park Jin-yook's organization is larger than my intelligence suggested. I've spent the last 18 hours doing a full assessment, and I've found gaps in my information that shouldn't exist." A pause. "Someone in my organization has been feeding him data for at least 4 months. Amara stopped moving. "What kind of data?" "Movement, schedule, the identity of my assets, and..." He stopped, started again. "Information about you, about your location, about the children." The floor felt different under her feet suddenly. "You have a leak." "Had, past tense. I've identified the source." His voice did something complicated. "One of my senior men, 12 years in the organization. I trusted him with everything." A pause. "He's been in contact with Park's people since June. The timeline suggests he was the one who flagged your bakery to Park before I found you." She understood the sequence then, rearranging in her head, the pieces clicking into different positions. "Park knew about me before you came in?" "Yes." "Which means the call I received wasn't a response to your visit. It was already planned." "Yes." A beat. "You received a call." She closed her eyes. 2 days ago. In the park. I told you last night. You told me someone called. You didn't tell me the timing, that it was before my own people had processed that you'd agreed to a meeting. Amara. His voice dropped. "Park's man called you within 6 hours of my first visit to your bakery. That's not a reaction. That's a prepared operation." She pressed her free hand against the prep table. "He already had the school routine. He knew the park. He's had surveillance on you for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. My source was feeding him updates." 2 weeks. She had been walking her children to school and running her bakery and lying awake at night making decisions. And for 2 weeks there had been eyes on her from an organization that had already decided what it wanted to do with the information. And she had not known, had had no idea, because the paranoia she'd maintained for 8 years had been calibrated for a threat that operated alone, and she had not accounted for a threat that had inside help. "The Saturday meeting," she said. "We move it. Different location, different day. I'll arrange it." "Taesung," she stopped. "How much does Park's organization know? About the children specifically?" A silence that was too long. "Tell me," she said. "They know their names," he said. "Their school, their after-school schedule, the route you walk them home." Another pause, and she could hear in it the specific weight of a man delivering information he would have done almost anything to not have to deliver. "They know their faces." She closed the bakery early. She called the school and told them the twins were being picked up by a family friend. She gave Taesung's name and description because she could not be in 2 places, and because the conversation they'd had in the last 20 minutes had reorganized her threat assessment in ways that left her with no good options that didn't involve him. The school secretary confirmed. Amara called Taesung and gave him the authorization. She stood behind her counter after the calls and looked at the bakery. The yellow walls, the hand-lettered menu board, the framed photographs of Lagos and Accra and Seoul from the bridge. She had 1 hour before Taesung arrived with her children. She used it to pull the cash she kept in the back safe. Not much, $1,100 in mixed currency, and her passports, hers, and the twins', and the small hard drive with 8 years of business records. She packed them into a bag she kept under the counter for no reason she had ever articulated to herself, except that somewhere in the back of her operating system, the habit of readiness had never fully shut off. She put the bag behind the counter, and she waited. Taesung arrived at 4:17 with the twins and two men she didn't know, and Kofi walking slightly ahead of the group with the expression of a child who had been told something he was still computing. Seo-yeon was watching Taesung with the focused appraisal she applied to everything she wasn't certain about yet. Not hostile, not warm, gathering data. Taesung met Amara's eyes over their children's heads the moment he came through the door, and she saw in his face the same thing she'd heard in his voice on the phone. The compression, the controlled damage of a man who had been betrayed by someone he trusted and was not going to let that show in front of an 8-year-old. He was good at that. She had forgotten how good. "Mom," Kofi said. "He says we've met before." "At the bakery?" Amara said. "Monday morning. You were doing homework. He says he knows you from before that." "That's true." Kofi looked at Taesung, then at his mother, then back at Taesung with the specific look he produced when he was deciding whether to ask the real question or the preliminary questions first. He chose preliminary. "Why are there two men outside?" "Because I work in a field that requires caution," Taesung said. His Korean was careful, not simplified, but paced. He had, without being asked, adjusted for a child's register without condescending to it. Amara noticed. The same way a surgeon might scrub their hands before an operation, caution is a habit. "What field?" "Management," Taesung said, "of a large number of people and resources. It requires keeping track of many things at once." Kofi considered this. Seo-yeon had moved closer to the counter without appearing to move, the slow gravitational drift of a child getting a better angle. She was looking at Taesung's face with an expression that made Amar's chest ache because she recognized it. It was the look Seo-yeon produced when she recognized something she didn't have language for yet. "You look like Kofi," Seo-yeon said. Taesung looked at her. Something moved through his face. Not a flinch, not a smile, something quieter than either. "I was thinking the same thing," he said. "We're twins," Kofi said, with the slight indignation of someone accustomed to this point being missed. "We look like each other." "You do," Taesung said, "but you also look like someone else." He paused. His hands, which had been still at his sides, moved once, a brief, involuntary gesture, like a man reaching for something and stopping himself. "I'd like to explain that to you, if you'll let me." The bakery was quiet. The October light came through the front windows and laid itself across the floor in pale rectangles, and the smell of the day's baking hung in the air, and the city moved outside the glass, indifferent to the specific weight of what was happening inside it. Kofi looked at his mother. She nodded. Taesung spoke to them for 40 minutes. Amara stayed behind the counter and listened and watched her children listen, and she watched Taesung do something she had not anticipated, which was to tell her children a version of the truth that was both honest and measured. Not the sanitized version, not the fairy tale, but a real account adjusted for what two 8-year-olds could hold. He told them he and their mother had loved each other. He told them that his work had made the world around them dangerous. He told them their mother had made the decision she had made because she was trying to protect them, and that he understood it even though it had cost him 8 years. He told them he was sorry he had not been there. He did not cry. He was not a man who cried easily. She knew that, had always known it. But his voice did something near the end, a slight roughening, a quality shift that was as close as she had ever seen him come. Seo-yeon asked 3 questions, each more precise than the last. Kofi asked none. He sat and listened, and when Taesung finished, he was quiet for a long moment. And then he said very seriously, "Are we in danger right now?" Taesung looked at him. "I'm working to make sure you aren't. But right now you are safe. I promise you that." "Okay," Kofi said, and nodded, and seemed, in the way he had of arriving at things through a process invisible to everyone but himself, to make a decision. She sent the children upstairs to the apartment at 5:30 with Sujin, who had arrived at 5 and had taken one look at the tableau and asked exactly 0 questions, which was why Amara valued her. She stood at the counter after they'd gone and looked at Taesung across the empty bakery, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "Your source," she said finally. "The man who leaked. Being handled." What does that mean? It means he won't be a problem. She didn't ask further. Park Jin-hyuk knows I haven't run. His man called me 2 days ago, and I didn't run. And Taesung arrived, and we're still here, and he knows all of that. Yes. So what's his next move? Taesung was quiet for a moment. He had moved to the window, stood slightly to the side of it, not directly in the glass, the old instinct. She remembered that about him, too. He never stood in windows. He's going to move before I can restructure my security. He has a window right now while my organization is processing the breach. He'll know that. A pause. 3 to 5 days? We don't have 3 days. He turned from the window. No, we don't. He looked at her for a long moment. I want to move you, tonight. The children too. To the estate. It's the most defensible position I have, and the staff is fully vetted. I'm not moving into your estate. Amara, not yet. Not like this. She stopped him with the flat of her voice. I am not taking my children out of their beds in the middle of the night and into your compound because we're afraid of a threat we haven't fully mapped yet. That's not... I need to think. I need tonight. He looked at her with the controlled frustration of a man who understood that pushing further would cost more than it gained. I'll have people on the street tonight, inside if you'll allow it. Outside. Inside the building entrance, not the apartment. She breathed. Fine. He nodded. He picked up his jacket from the counter where he'd set it. He started toward the door and stopped, and she knew from the quality of the stop that there was something else. Something he had been carrying through the last hour and had been deciding when to put down. The man who leaked, he said. His name is Woo Chang-sik. He worked for me for 12 years. I gave him my trust in the way I give very few people my trust. He paused. He told Park's people about you before I came to the bakery. He was the reason Park called you. He was also the reason I found you. Because 6 weeks ago I noticed a surveillance report that didn't match any assignment I'd given, and I tracked it back. And that's when I understood that someone in my organization knew where you were. He stopped. I found you because he was already watching you. I need you to know that. She stood with that for a moment. So you came to me partly to get there before Park did. I came to you because I had been waiting for a reason that felt sufficient, and an enemy's interest in you was finally sufficient. He looked at her. I want to be honest with you. I told you I would be. You're 12 years late on the honest front. I know. He paused. But I'm here now. He left. She stood in the empty bakery and listened to his footsteps on the stairs and the sound of the front door, and then the street, and she breathed through the complicated, unwelcome, deeply inconvenient truth that she had not stopped loving him, had not, despite 8 years and an ocean and the complete reconstruction of her life, managed to fully close the room in herself where he lived. And the room had opened again as simply as a door. And she did not know what to do with that except stand with it in her own bakery at 6 p.m. and acknowledge that it was real. She went upstairs. She was wrong about having tonight. She understood that at 11:40 p.m., when her phone rang and the voice on the other end was not Taesung, it was Sujin, and Sujin was crying. They called the school, Sujin said, barely coherent, words tumbling and breaking. They said, someone called the emergency line at the after-school records office. They gave your authorization code. Ice moved through Amara's body. Sujin, they got the emergency pickup records from Monday. Amara, they have the address of the estate. They know Taesung picked them up there on Monday. They have the... Sujin, stop. She gripped the phone hard enough that her knuckles ached. Are the children in their room? Yes. Yes, they're here. I checked. They're... Don't open the door. Don't open the building door for anyone. I'm calling Taesung. She hung up. She called Taesung. He picked up before the first ring completed, which meant he was already awake, already in a different context than the one she'd assumed. They hit the school records office, he said, before she could speak. How do you already... My man at the building entrance flagged a vehicle 20 minutes ago. I've been trying to reach you. His voice was the compressed quality again, but faster now. Operational. I need you to take the children and go to the 3rd floor of your building and stay away from the windows. My people are 4 minutes out. What's happening? Park moved faster than I estimated. He's not sending another phone call. A sound behind him. Movement. Voices. The click of something mechanical that she recognized and felt in her stomach. He's coming to take the children, Amara. That's the leverage he needs. Not a threat. A fact. Do you understand me? She was already moving. Through the kitchen, down the hall, into the twins' room. Kofi and Seo Yan were asleep, the familiar shapes of them, and she reached for Kofi first because he was closer, her hand on his shoulder, shaking him gently, and then not gently because there was no time for gentle. Up, she said. Now, both of you. Don't ask, just up. Yama? Seo Yan blinking. Now. She had them both up and moving in 40 seconds, both of them with the groggy, frightened compliance of children who had been woken fast and could read their mother's face. And she had them in the hallway and moving toward the stairwell, and she still had the phone in her hand, and Taesung was still on it when the sound came from downstairs, not from the front entrance, not where she expected, but from the back of the building, from the service entrance that she'd thought was locked. A bang and then voices, Korean, multiple, and footsteps on the back stairs. She stopped. They're in the building, she said. How many floors to the... They're in the building, Taesung. They're on the back stairs. A silence of 1 second. 2. The footsteps below getting closer. Amara. His voice was stripped now. All the compression gone, just the raw tone of it. I need you to listen to me. Do exactly what I say. The front stairwell is still clear. Take the children to the roof access door, 3rd floor landing, the blue door, and wait. My people are 2 minutes out. 2 minutes. She looked at her children. Kofi had her hand in both of his, and his face was very still and very white, and he was not asking any questions now. Seo Yan was pressed against the wall with her jaw set in a way that was so precisely, exactly Taesung, that it broke something in Amar's chest even in this moment. Some last sealed thing. Some final insulation between what she'd been telling herself and what was actually true. 2 minutes, she said. 2 minutes. I promise you. She moved. The footsteps below were at the 2nd floor landing when she pushed through the door to the front stairwell with one child on each side. The building was quiet around them, except for the sound of her own breathing and the children's feet on the stairs, and the footsteps behind the door they'd just come through, getting louder. The men on the other side not bothering now to be quiet because quiet was no longer the point. 1st floor. 2nd. She could hear them through the walls, parallel, catching up. The 3rd floor landing was above her, the blue door visible in the stairwell light, and she was counting steps and breathing and holding her children's hands and not thinking about what happened if the 2 minutes were wrong, if the timing was off, if Taesung's men arrived at 3 minutes instead of 2, because 2 minutes was the difference between... The stairwell door below her burst open. She ran. The blue door, her shoulder into it. It gave... An alarm sounded, thin and useless. And they were on the roof in the cold October air. The city spread out around them in its indifferent blaze, and she pulled the door shut behind them and put her back against it, and held her children against her and felt the door shutter once as someone hit it from the other side. Yama, Kofi said. His voice was steady. 8 years old, and his voice was steady, and she pulled him closer. I've got you, she said. I've got you both. The door shuttered again. The latch was holding, but it was a roof access latch, not a security door, and she could feel through her spine the incremental giving of the mechanism. The pressure on the other side organized and determined and patient, in the way that organized violence was patient when it understood that time was on its side. Her phone was still in her hand. She looked at it. The call with Taesung was still open. Taesung, she said. I see you, he said. And she heard behind his voice a sound she recognized. Rotors. Close. Getting closer. 30 seconds. The latch gave another fraction of an inch. Her children were pressed against her sides, both of them, and she was standing with her back against a roof door in the cold and the dark, with the city burning below her in all its beautiful indifference. And she understood with absolute clarity what she was going to say to Taesung when this was over. Not the words she'd been rehearsing for 8 years, not the careful, defended version of the conversation she'd been having with herself since Monday morning. The real one. The one that started with "I was wrong to run without you" and ended somewhere neither of them had been yet. The latch snapped. The door began to open. And the lights of the helicopter crested the roof line, flooding the roof in white, and Taesung's voice in her ear said, "Get down!" She dropped before the word was finished, pulling both children with her, her knees hitting the roof surface hard enough to send shock up through both legs, and the helicopter's light swept across the roof door as it swung fully open, and the two men who came through it had exactly 1 second to register the aircraft before Taesong's people fast roped down with the organized violence of men who had done this in worse conditions and with less justification. It was over in 40 seconds. Not cleanly. Nothing like this was clean. She understood that. Had understood it from the years when she'd been close enough to see how the organization operated when it had to operate at full capacity. One of Park's men got back through the door before he was contained. The other went down on the roof surface and stayed down, and she turned her children's faces away from it and held them against her chest and kept her own eyes up and forward and counted her heartbeats the way she'd taught herself to count them in the years after Seoul, when the fear had lived in her body like a second tenant. Taesung came off the rope last. He crossed the roof in 8 steps and crouched in front of her, and his hands went to her face first. Both of them, cupping her jaw, his thumbs checking the cut on her cheek from 2 days ago, and the new one she hadn't noticed she had, from the door edge when she'd shouldered through it. His eyes moved over her the way a man's eyes moved when he was running a damage assessment and trying not to let the assessment become something more than assessment. "I'm fine," she said. He looked at the children. "Are you hurt?" Kofi shook his head. Seo-yeon said very precisely, "No." Then she looked at the man on the roof surface and looked away and looked back at Taesung and said, "Is he dead?" "No," Taesung said, which was either true or a decision he made in the moment about what an 8-year-old needed to hear, and Amara did not ask him to clarify. "Okay," Seo-yeon said, and leaned against Amara's shoulder and shut her eyes. They were in the estate by 1 a.m. The Kang estate sat in the hills north of the city, not ostentatious in the way of men who needed the display, but large and walled and lit at every approach point with the quiet thoroughness of a place that had been designed around the assumption of threat. Amara had been here once before, years ago, for a dinner she had attended against her better judgment, and which had ended with Taesong's mother looking at her across a table and making the assessment she'd been making ever since. The children were put to bed in adjacent rooms by a staff member who moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had handled disrupted children before and asked no questions. Amara stood in the hallway outside their doors until she could hear them both breathing at the rhythm of sleep, which took Seo-yeon 4 minutes and Kofi 11, because Kofi needed to work through things even when he was exhausted. Then she walked downstairs to find Taesung, Munset. He was in the study with 3 men she didn't know, standing around a table with a city map and a series of photographs spread across it, and he looked up when she came in and said something to the men in Korean too fast for her to follow, and they filed out without looking at her. She closed the door. The study smelled like old paper and something she remembered, some specific combination of wood and the particular ink he used, a detail so small and so precise that it hit her somewhere below the sternum like a low punch. 8 years, and the room still organized itself the same way around him. "Tell me what's happening," she said. He moved back to the table. He turned one of the photographs to face her. An aerial image, a building she didn't recognize, industrial district somewhere south of the city. Park Jin-hyuk operates out of 3 locations. 2 are legitimate business fronts. The third is this. He put his finger on the photograph. A logistics facility in Sihung. That's where his operation is actually run from. And I'm going there tomorrow night. She looked at the photograph, then at him. "You're going personally?" "Yes." That's, She stopped. "That's what he wants. He wants you out of a controlled environment. He wants you exposed." "I know." "Then why?" "Because waiting lets him reorganize." He straightened up from the table. He looked at her with the particular directness he produced when he had already finished the argument with himself and arrived at the conclusion and was now informing you of the result. "He hit your building tonight. He tried to take our children. If I let him consolidate, he tries again with more resources and better planning. The window to end this is the next 36 hours, before he understands how much ground he's lost tonight." Our children. He had said it without emphasis, without performance, the pronoun arriving in the sentence as a simple fact, and she felt it land the same way without the resistance she might have expected. It had become true somewhere in the last 72 hours. She couldn't identify the exact moment. "I'm going with you," she said. "No." Tae-sung, the children need someone here who isn't staff. They need you here. He paused. That's not a dismissal. That's the operational reality. She breathed through the frustration of knowing he was right. "What's your plan?" "Controlled entry, isolated engagement. I want Park in a room where I'm the one asking questions." He said it simply, the way he said things that to other people would require elaborate justification. "I need him to understand that this ends here, that coming after my family is a line that has a specific and permanent consequence." "And if he doesn't understand?" Tae-sung looked at her. "He will." She didn't sleep. She sat in the chair in the hallway outside the children's rooms and drank the tea that one of the staff brought her without being asked, and she listened to the estate at 2 a.m., the movement of Tae-sung's men through the lower floors, the distant sound of vehicles on the road beyond the wall, the ordinary sounds of a large house operating at heightened alert. At 3:15, she heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up, and it was Tae-sung, still in the same clothes, carrying his own cup of tea with the unhurried quality of a man who had stopped trying to pretend he was going to sleep. He sat down on the floor of the hallway with his back against the wall opposite her, which was not what she'd expected, and stretched his legs out in front of him, and they sat in the quiet hallway outside their children's rooms and drank tea and didn't speak for a while. "I looked for you," he said finally. Not an accusation, a statement. "For 2 years after you left, I had people in 8 countries." "I know." "How?" "Because I know you, and because I moved carefully." She looked at her cup. "London for 6 months, then Lagos for the pregnancy and the first year, then here." "Lagos." He absorbed that. "You had the children in Lagos." "My mother was there. I needed my mother." He nodded slowly. He looked at the wall opposite him. What were their first words? She hadn't expected the question. The specificity of it, not what were they like as babies, or when did they start walking, but the exact particular question of a man who had been thinking about the specific things he'd missed and had settled on this one. "Kofi's first word was more," she said. "Food. He was very interested in food from the beginning." A pause. "Seoyeon's first word was no, which she used correctly and frequently." Something moved through his face, not quite a smile, too much underneath it for a smile. "She gets that from you. She gets that from both of us." He looked at her. She looked at him. The hallway was quiet around them, and the estate was quiet around the hallway, and somewhere in the rooms behind the 2 doors her children were sleeping, and she understood sitting there that she had been wrong about a number of things. Not about her reasons for running, not about the fear that had driven it. Those were real, and she would not retroactively unmake them. But about the assumption that had underlain the running. The assumption that he would not have chosen differently if she'd given him the chance to choose. She didn't say it yet. Not tonight. Tonight had too many other things in it already. "Come back tomorrow," she said instead. He looked at her. "Come back," she said. "From whatever you're doing tomorrow night, come back." He held her gaze for a moment. "I intend to." "That's not what I said." He understood the difference. "I'll come back," he said. He left at 6 a.m. with 4 men and 2 vehicles, and she watched the gate close behind them from the upstairs window, and then went to make breakfast because her children would wake in an hour, and they needed to wake up to something ordinary, something that smelled like food and felt like a morning, because they were 8 years old and they had slept in a strange house after watching a man go down on a rooftop, and they deserved the dignity of an ordinary breakfast even in the middle of everything else. She was at the stove when Tae-sung's mother appeared in the kitchen doorway in a dressing gown and slippers, moving with the particular unhurried authority of a woman in her own house. "You cook," Mrs. Kong said. "It's my profession." "I know. I'm not surprised. I'm just noting it." She moved to the counter and stood there in the way of a woman who was going to stay whether or not she was invited, and knew it. "He told me about the facility in Sihung." "He shouldn't have." "He didn't, specifically. He told me he was going out. The rest I have inferred over 41 years of knowing him." She was quiet for a moment. "He's never brought anyone here before. Not since you, 8 years ago." Amar kept her eyes on the pan. Mrs. Kang, I'm not pressuring you, I'm informing you. A pause. He rebuilt the organization after you left, made it harder, made it more controlled, cut everything that wasn't essential. My husband's people used to say he'd gone cold. She paused. He hadn't gone cold. He'd gone careful. There's a difference. Amara stirred the eggs. He's been waiting, Mrs. Kang said. Not for you specifically. I don't think he let himself wait for you specifically, because that would have been a kind of hope he couldn't afford. But for something worth the cost of what he does. She was quiet. I think he found it. Amara said nothing. She plated the eggs. She started on the toast. Mrs. Kang stayed at the counter in companionable silence, which was its own kind of statement, and Amara let her stay. And when the toast was done, she put 2 extra pieces on the plate without being asked, and Mrs. Kang took them without comment and sat at the kitchen table. And they ate in the early morning quiet of a house where something irrevocable was in the process of settling into its final form. The children came downstairs at 7:30. Kofi registered Mrs. Kang with a brief, careful look and a formal annyeonghaseyo that made the old woman sit up slightly with what was clearly suppressed approval. Seo-yeon sat across from her and said with no preamble, Are you related to us? Mrs. Kang looked at Amara. She's Taesung's mother, Amara said. Seo-yeon processed this. So she's our grandmother. That's one way to frame it. Is there another way? Not really, Amara said. Seo-yeon turned back to Mrs. Kang. What should we call you? Mrs. Kang looked at the girl for a long moment, at the eyes she shared with her son, the jaw, the composed self-possession. And something in the old woman's face went soft in a way that she probably didn't intend to display and didn't bother to hide. Halmoni, she said. If you want. Okay, Seo-yeon said, and picked up her toast. Taesung's call came at 4:17 p.m. She had been watching the gate since 2, which she did not admit to herself as watching the gate, but which was watching the gate, and when the phone rang, she answered it in the middle of the first ring. It's done, he said. She breathed. You're not hurt. Not significantly. I'm not hurt, he said, more carefully. Park understands the situation now. She pressed her free hand flat against the window glass. Cold. The October afternoon going gray at the edges. The children are fine. Your mother is here. She fed them lunch, and Seo-yeon has been interrogating her for 2 hours. A pause that had warmth in it, somewhere underneath everything else. That sounds right? Come home, she said. The word arrived in the sentence before she'd decided to use it, and she heard it land in the silence on his end. The specific weight of it, home, in her voice, said to him. And she did not take it back because she did not want to take it back, because she had been running from the truth of it for 8 years and she was tired, and her children were safe, and she was standing at a window in a house on a hill in Seoul, watching the gate. And she was done running from the words that were actually true. 20 minutes, he said. She stayed at the window. She watched the gate. And at 22 minutes, because nothing in his world ran exactly on schedule, because the gap between intention and arrival was always filled with the friction of a world that pushed back, the gate opened and the first vehicle came through, and she pressed her forehead briefly against the cold glass and closed her eyes, and let herself feel, for the first time in 8 years, the particular relief of something she had thought was gone arriving back into the space where it had always belonged. Then she straightened up. She went downstairs. She opened the door before he reached it, which meant he saw her face first, unguarded, before she had time to decide what to do with it. And he stopped on the steps and looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment because the moment was already full. 22 minutes, she said. Traffic, he said. You don't take traffic personally. Tonight I do. She stepped back from the door. He came in, and in the hallway of his estate, with his children's voices coming from the kitchen and his mother's low response and the smell of the dinner that the cook had started an hour ago moving through the whole house, Kang Tae-sung looked at Amara Okoye, and she looked back at him, and the 8 years between them were still there, real, unretractable, full of cost. But they were also, finally, the 8 years between them were still there, real, unretractable, full of cost. But they were also, finally, something that could be looked at directly instead of around. She stepped back from the doorway. He came in. She closed the door. Neither of them moved toward the other. They stood in the hallway of his estate with the sounds of the house around them, the children's voices from the kitchen, Mrs. Kang's low response, the cook's movements, the ordinary living sounds of a house that had been quiet for too long. And they looked at each other with the particular clarity that comes after fear has burned through everything that isn't essential. He had a cut along his jaw, fresh, closed, but not stitched. His jacket was gone. The left sleeve of his shirt was torn at the shoulder in a way that said someone had grabbed it hard and not let go cleanly. He was standing straight, but she could see in the set of his shoulders the particular rigidity of a man managing pain he wasn't going to announce. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine." "You said not significantly hurt. That means you're hurt. Sit down." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man deciding whether this particular battle was worth engaging. He sat down on the bench along the hallway wall. She went to the kitchen. She came back with the first aid kit from the cabinet above the refrigerator, which she'd located 2 hours ago the way she located everything in unfamiliar kitchens. Systematically, because knowing where things were was a form of control she had learned to exercise in every new space she occupied. She sat beside him on the bench and opened the kit and looked at the cut on his jaw. "This should have been stitched," she said. "I know." "Why wasn't it?" "There wasn't time." She cleaned it without asking permission, and he sat still and let her, and she felt his eyes on the side of her face while she worked. Not uncomfortable, not intrusive, just present in the way his attention had always been present, with the full weight of a man who was rarely anywhere other than where he was. "Park," she said. Not a question exactly. "He'll stand down." He paused. "He understands what continued aggression costs him. He's a practical man ultimately. Practical men recalculate when the variables change." "You changed the variables." "Significantly." She pressed a butterfly closure along the cut. His jaw moved slightly under her fingers. Not a flinch, just the involuntary response of damaged tissue to pressure. And his organization, dismantled at the operational level. His senior people have been given a clear account of what supporting continued hostility toward my family will cost them individually. He paused. Most of them are practical men as well. She set the last closure and sat back and looked at her work. Clean enough. It would scar. A thin line along the jaw that he would carry for the rest of his life. One more mark in a collection she had not been present to see accumulate. The leak. Wu Chang-sik. Handled. What does that mean this time? It means he won't be a problem. He looked at her. He's alive. I want you to know that. He's removed from the organization, and he's been given a very specific accounting of what resuming contact with Park or anyone adjacent to Park will cost him. But he's alive. She held his gaze. That's different from what I would have expected. I know. A pause. I'm trying to be a man my children can know without flinching. She felt that land. Set the first aid kit on the bench beside her and breathed. "Tai-sung, I know what I've been," he said. Not defensive, not performing contrition, simply stating a fact he had spent time with. "I know the shape of it. I'm not asking you to forget that. I'm telling you I'm aware of it, which is a different thing." "It is a different thing," she said. "Yes." From the kitchen, Seo Yeon's voice. "Halmoni, but why do people make rules if they're going to break them anyway?" And Mrs. Kang's dry response. "That is the central question of human civilization. Eat your rice." Taesung looked toward the kitchen. The thing that moved through his face then was not complicated. It was very simple, which was what made it difficult to look at. A man seeing something he had believed was gone returned to him at the specific cost that made it real. He stood. He moved toward the kitchen. At the doorway he stopped, and she watched him stand there looking at his children at the table. Kofi with a book open beside his bowl, because he could not eat without reading. Seo Yeon with her chin in one hand conducting her ongoing philosophical interrogation of a 68-year-old woman who was giving as good as she got. And she watched him look, and she did not look away, because this was also something true that deserved to be witnessed. Kofi looked up, saw him, looked at his face with the careful reading he applied to everything. "You're back," he said. "I'm back." "You're hurt." "A little." Kofi considered this. "Did you win?" Taesung paused. The people who came to your mother's building last night won't come back. That's not what I asked. Kofi, Amara said from behind Taesung, and Kofi accepted the redirection with the slight headshake of a child who has been told that some questions have later answers, and went back to his book. Seo Yan had turned around on her stool and was looking at Taesung with the direct assessment she'd been applying to him since the moment she first saw his face. She said nothing. She turned back to Mrs. Kang and said, "He's hurt. Does he always come home hurt?" And Mrs. Kang said, "Less often than you might think. More often than I'd prefer," and took a sip of her tea with the serenity of a woman who had made her peace with the texture of her life. Dinner was not a simple meal, and it was not a comfortable one, but it was real in the way that mattered. The particular awkward realness of people who don't have established patterns yet, who are learning the mechanics of a shared table for the first time. Kofi asked Taesung 11 questions, none of them small, and Taesung answered each one with the same measured honesty he'd used in the bakery. Not full disclosure, not softened fiction, but the version of truth calibrated for what a child could hold and build on. Seoyeon contributed 3 precise follow-up questions that demonstrated she had been listening to every word of all 11 and had synthesized them into a larger framework she was now stress testing. Mrs. Kang watched all of it with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this table for a long time and was allowing herself, cautiously, to believe it was real. Amara moved between the kitchen and the table and sat when she could, and stood when she needed to, and she watched her children talking to their father, and she felt the full complicated weight of 8 years of a decision she had made alone settling into its final accounting. Not guilt exactly. She had done what she understood to be necessary at the time, and she would not perform a contrition that wasn't real, but a reckoning. The honest assessment of what the decision had cost that she had been deferring for 8 years because the deferral was easier than the math. The children had grown up without their father. That was a fact, and the fact that she had had reasons did not make the fact smaller. After dinner, after the children had been put to bed by a process that required 3 separate negotiations, and one story told by Taesung in Korean that Kofi followed imperfectly and Seoyeon followed completely, and both of them pretended to sleep through so he would keep going. After all of that, Amara sat at the kitchen table with her hands around a cup of tea and waited for Mrs. Kang to go to bed. And when the old woman finally said goodnight and paused in the doorway and looked at Amara with a look that communicated an entire compressed position in 2 seconds, Amara nodded and Mrs. Kang left. Taesung came in from locking up. He sat across the table from her. He had changed his shirt, the torn one gone, a clean one, the specific dark blue she remembered he defaulted to at the end of days. His shoulder was wrapped under it. She could see the line of the bandaging, which answered the question of what not significantly hurt had meant. They sat in the kitchen quiet for a while. "I need to say something," she said. "All right. I've been telling myself for 8 years that I ran for the children, and that's true. I'm not retracting it. The fear was real, and the reasons were real, and if I were in that bathroom again with that test, I would still leave, because I couldn't see another choice from where I was standing." "But so-san," she stopped, turned the cup in her hands. "But I've also been telling myself that I would have stayed if I'd been brave enough to ask you to change, and that's not true. I didn't stay and ask because I was afraid of the answer. I was afraid you would say no, that the organization was what you were, and you couldn't be anything else, and I couldn't survive hearing that. So I didn't ask, I just left." He looked at her across the table. He said nothing. "That's not a noble version of the story," she said. "The noble version is the one I told myself for 8 years. Protecting my children, making the hard sacrifice, keeping them safe. The real version has fear in it that wasn't about them. I want you to know that I know the difference." He was quiet for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table, still, the way his hands went still when he was working through something at depth. "I want to tell you something as well," he said. "All right, when you left, in the months after, I understood why. Not immediately, but eventually. I understood the arithmetic of what I was asking you to live inside, and I understood why a woman with your clarity would not accept it, and I understood that the choice you made was not about not loving me." He paused. "What I've carried for 8 years is not anger at you for leaving. It's anger at myself for building something that made the leaving logical." He looked at her. "I was 41 before my children told me goodnight. That is the cost of the thing I built, and I've known it, and I've been sitting with it since the moment I drove away from your bakery on Monday." She looked at him across the table. The kitchen light was low. Outside, the estate was quiet, the guards at their posts, the city beyond the wall going about its enormous nightly business, indifferent to the particular accounting happening in this kitchen. "What are you going to do with the organization?" she said. "Begin transitioning it." He said it without hesitation, which meant it was not a new thought. "I've been moving certain operations toward legitimate structures for 3 years already. Slower than I should have. I'll accelerate that." A pause. "It will take time. I can't dismantle 12 years of organization overnight without consequences that are worse than the organization itself. But in 5 years, 6, it can be something different, something my children can know the shape of without needing to protect them from it. That's a long time." "Yes. And in the meantime, I need to keep them safe while the transition happens." He looked at her steadily. "Which is why I need to ask you something, and I need you to know before I ask it that the answer you give is the answer I'll accept. I'm not leveraging anything. I'm not applying pressure. I'm asking." She waited. "Marry me again," he said. "Not for the same reasons as before. Not the way it happened before. Not because you fell into my world without fully knowing what it was. Knowing everything, choosing it anyway." He paused. "The public declaration makes the children's status unambiguous. It makes you untouchable within a legal framework I can build around it. And it means—" He stopped, started again, and she could hear in the starting again that this was the part he found harder to say than the operational justification. "It means I'm not going to watch you from across a room for the rest of my life and know what we could have been." The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at his face, the cut along his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes that he was managing through the same controlled stillness he managed everything, the specific vulnerability of a man who had said a real thing and was now waiting with no leverage and no plan B and nothing but the waiting itself. "Not yet," she said. He absorbed that. "I mean that," she said. Not yet. I need to live in the same city as you for more than 4 days before I make that decision. I need my children to know their father in the ordinary way. Breakfast, homework, the fights about bedtime. I need to trust what we're building before I build the last thing." She looked at him. "But I'm not leaving. I'm staying in Seoul. I'm keeping the bakery. And I want you in our lives. Not from the edge of them, not through supervised meetings. In them. The way you should have been." He held her gaze. "That's enough," he said. "That's everything," she said. "Don't mistake it for less." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite the smile she remembered, but the architecture of it, the place where a smile lived when a man had not had a reason for one in a long time and was remembering the mechanism. "I know what it is," he said. "Tja." The weeks that followed were not easy and did not pretend to be. Amara moved the twins back to the apartment above the bakery. A decision that required 3 conversations with Taesung, all of which were tense, and 2 of which ended without resolution, before the third produced a compromise that neither of them was fully satisfied with, which meant it was an actual compromise. 2 of Taesung's people on the street at all times, a security system in the building that was better than anything the building's landlord would have chosen, and a direct line between Amara and the 4 men at the top of Taesung's personal security team. Not a cage. A perimeter. She held the line on the distinction, and he respected it, eventually, after the second conversation. He came to the bakery on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He sat at the corner table, the children's table, the one where Kofi had been doing his math worksheet the morning everything changed. And he drank his coffee, and he helped Kofi with the math problems that were still frustrating, and he listened to Seo-yeon's ongoing serial narrative about the civilization she was building in the back garden of the estate on weekends, and he did not try to make any of it more than what it was. He let it be breakfast. He let it be Tuesday morning. He was, she discovered, a patient man in ways she had seen, but not fully understood when she was 26, and love was still new enough to be dazzling rather than clear. The patience she had known then had been applied to strategy, to the management of large and complicated systems. This patience was different, the patience of a man who had arrived late to something and understood that arriving late meant earning ground slowly, that there were no shortcuts through the ordinary accumulation of days. Kofi tested him in the specific way Kofi tested everything, not hostility, not resistance, but the methodical stress testing of a child who needed to understand the structure before he trusted it. He asked hard questions at breakfast, and harder ones on weekends, and the hardest ones in the car on the way home from the estate on Sunday evenings, when it was just him and Taesung for 15 minutes, and he seemed to have decided this was the window for the questions he hadn't asked in front of other people. Taesung answered all of them, not perfectly, not always with the answer Kofi wanted, but with the honesty the questions deserved, calibrated for an 8-year-old who was too perceptive to be managed and too principled to be redirected. Seo-yeon's approach was different. She simply included him, announced one Saturday morning that he was going to help her build the next district of her garden civilization because she had a structural problem she needed another set of hands for. And she directed the construction with the authority of a general who has decided that the new recruit has potential and is willing to invest the time. Taesung spent 4 hours on his knees in a garden building small structures out of sticks and flat stones to specifications delivered by an 8-year-old. And he did it without complaint and with genuine attention to the specifications. And by the end of it, Seo-yeon had decided, in the particular way she decided things, that he was acceptable. Mrs. Kang came to the bakery on a Wednesday in November and sat at the counter and ordered tea and a slice of the honey cake and did not announce herself as Taesung's mother to Sujin, who found out later and spent the rest of the day in a state of suppressed reverence that Amara found both touching and mildly exhausting. The old woman and Amara sat for an hour in the slow middle of the afternoon and talked about things that had nothing to do with Taesung, the bakery's supplier problems, a neighborhood renovation that was disrupting foot traffic, a book Mrs. Kang had just finished that she'd found both impressive and deeply annoying. At the end of the hour, she put on her coat and said, without preamble, "You were right to wait. The first time. I know that's not what I said then." She paused. "I was wrong." Amara looked at her. "You were protecting your son." "I was protecting the organization," Mrs. Kang said. "There's a difference. It took me a long time to be honest about that." She buttoned her coat. "He's better with them, the children. He's lighter. I hadn't realized how heavy he'd gotten until I watched him in that garden with Seo-yeon." She stopped. "Thank you for that, even though you did it by leaving." She left before Amara could answer, which was probably deliberate, and Amara stood behind her counter and breathed and let that land where it needed to land. In December, Amara hired a second baker. The wholesale accounts had grown. A fourth restaurant, 2 corporate accounts that had come through a referral she hadn't solicited, a weekly order from a hotel in Mapo that had found her through the kind of low-level word of mouth that was the only marketing she'd ever done. The bakery was outgrowing what she and Sujin could manage alone, which was a problem she was glad to have and which required the practical solution of another person. She told Taesung about it on a Thursday morning, and he said, "Do you need capital?" And she said, "No." And he said, "All right," and drank his coffee, and that was it. No push, no offer repeated, just, "All right." She had been waiting for the moment when his instinct to control resources would arrive in her bakery, and she would have to push it back. And it hadn't arrived. She was still waiting, with diminishing certainty that it was coming. She was not naive. She understood that the organization still ran and would run for years yet, that the transition he was building was real but slow, that there were still men on her street at night and a system in her building that she had not chosen. She understood that the world he operated in had a weight and momentum that could not be redirected in a season. She did not pretend otherwise to herself or to him. But she also understood, standing in her bakery on a December morning with the second batch of chin-chin in the oven and the display case full, and Sujin training the new baker on the espresso machine and her children due at 3, that she had spent 8 years treating survival as the goal, keeping them safe, keeping them hidden, keeping the walls up and the perimeter clear. And survival was a worthy goal. She would not diminish it. It had required everything she had for 8 years, and she was not ashamed of it. But it was not the same thing as living, and she had confused them for a long time. The proposal came again on a Sunday in January, not at the kitchen table, not with the operational framing. He came to pick up the children for their weekend at the estate, and she was locking the bakery, and he waited while she finished. And then he said, on the sidewalk outside her bakery, in the January cold with Kofi already in the car, and Seo Yan examining something on the ground 6 feet away with the deep focus of a scientist, and Sol moving past them both indifferent. I'm still asking. She looked at him. Not pressure, he said. I told you I'd accept the answer you gave me. I'm accepting it. I'm also still asking. She looked at him for a long moment. His face in the January light, the scar along his jaw now faded to a thin, pale line. The eyes the same dark that caught light without giving anything back. The particular patience of a man who had learned to wait for things that mattered. She thought about the bathroom floor in the apartment next to his, the test in her hands, the decision she had made alone in 30 seconds, sitting on cold tile because she had been too afraid to ask. She was not afraid anymore. She had not been afraid for a while. She had been waiting to be certain, which was different, and she had been certain for longer than she'd admitted. Ask me in the spring, she said. He looked at her. I want it to be spring, she said. When you ask me properly. I want it to be warm. She held his gaze. And I'm going to say yes. I want you to know that. I'm not making you wait because I'm uncertain. I'm making you wait because I want the moment to be the right one. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Spring, he said. March, she said. Ask me in March. The corner of his mouth, the architecture of the smile. I'll need to find a moment where Seo Yan isn't conducting field work nearby. Good luck with that. Yama. Seo Yan from 6 feet away, not looking up from whatever she was examining. I can hear you. She can always hear me, Amara said. She gets that from you, Taesung said. You said that before. It's still true. Seo Yan stood up and came to Amara and held up the thing she'd been looking at. A small, flat stone, gray-green, the kind that could be a building material for a civilization being constructed in a garden on a hill north of the city. Can I keep it? She said. It's a rock, Amara said. You don't need my permission. I know, Seo Yan said. I just wanted to show you. She put the stone in her pocket and went to the car. Taesung looked at Amara. She looked at him. The January cold moved between them, and they stood on the sidewalk outside her bakery on a Sunday afternoon, and Seoul went about its life around them, and there was nothing dramatic left in the moment, no fear, no urgency, no weight of uncounted years pressing down. Just a woman and a man on a sidewalk, choosing each other in the ordinary daylight, in the way that mattered most because it was not compelled by anything except what was true. Go, she said. They have homework. Kofi brought his book. He always brings his book. Make him close it for dinner. He nodded. He turned toward the car. He stopped once, briefly, and looked back at her the way he had looked at her from the display case on Monday morning in October, with the specific attention of a man registering something he intends to keep. And then he got in the car, and the car pulled away, and she stood on the sidewalk and watched it go until it turned the corner. Then she went back inside her bakery. She turned the lights back on. She checked the oven temperature for tomorrow's prep and made a note about the flour order and wiped down the counter, the same counter she had pressed her palms against in October when she'd needed something solid and cold to hold. The bakery smelled like cardamom and good bread and the particular warmth of a space that has been used well. The hand-lettered menu board. The photographs of Lagos and Accra and Seoul from the bridge. The small, imperfect real life she had built from nothing in a city that had not known her name and had learned it slowly, the way all real things were learned. Not all at once, not without resistance, but permanently. Outside, Seoul went on in its enormous ordinary life, carrying its 8 million people toward their evenings, indifferent to all of their particular salvations. Inside, Amara Okoye turned off the extra lights, put on her coat, and locked her bakery, and walked home through the January cold with her hands in her pockets and her head up to the apartment above the shop where her life had always been, and where it was going to continue, changed, fuller, more complicated than she had planned, and completely, unreservedly hers.